Welcome to Code Savvy Presents, a podcast about computer science, technology, accessibility, and inclusion. Thank you for coming today to talk to me about yourself and your projects. How about let's first introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I'm Lynn Smith, founder of Migraine Insight. And my background is actually originally technical, but I've been doing user experience work mostly for large corporations and also small startups for the last 20 years or so. It's been a long, fun road with watching everything evolve the way it has been. And so my background is in UX.
Okay, so has Migraine Insight, is that the only app that is that your full-time project right now, or your
full-time job
full-time
right
company?
now
Okay.
is founder of that company. And of course, when you're founding a company, there's many hats that you wear. So this is actually the least user experience I've done like in the last 20 years. As the last year or two starting up this company, I am leading the user experience of it, but that's like 2/3 of my time is more leading company leadership functions.
Okay.
But yeah.
Can you tell me more about Migraine Insight? What kind of problem are you solving?
Yeah, so this is an effort to help people with chronic conditions, episodic chronic conditions, and starting with migraines, figure out sort of what's causing their episodes to come on. So this is one of those long-standing medical problems. As apps have evolved and phones have evolved, we now have these little data collectors in our pocket. Migraine Insight is basically taking the stance that we can use that to collect enough data with somebody's permission when they want to, of course, all the safety you could ever have built in, HIPAA compliant, but allow people to then have a little configurator that helps highlight what type of things might be causing their migraine. So it's got a little back-end pattern finding bot, as we call it internally. And it's been really successful. We have a great community of users that constantly give us feedback and really sort of keep us sharp. It's really the first effort of its type, even across other chronic conditions too, to really try to help the person individually use their own data to figure out what might be causing episodes of illness. So.
Well, and it's a really cool way to use technology to kind of find those patterns, because I know a lot of people have, tried to keep it in their head, or maybe they'll try to keep a journal, but having that robot assistance, that seems like it would be a really awesome tool.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah.
I was just going to say, did you come to this from your own experience? Like, is your user experience kind of built into the model?
Yeah, absolutely. When I decided I wanted to really think about the patient and how to best help the patient sort of outside of the siloed medical system that keeps really good electronic health records, but not necessarily gets at what's causing people's episodes to happen. Yeah. I came to it from somebody who has migraines myself, and they're really well managed. But I was actually at the Mayo Clinic a few years back working on a completely separate project. And a neurologist there pulled me aside, and he was just like, it's standard practice when we diagnose migraines to tell people to find their triggers. We have clinical evidence. People who find their triggers do much better. We know also that people with chronic migraines, that's 15 or more per month, their suicide rate is 9 times higher. Like, this is a very severe, difficult illness. If you can find your triggers, you can have, the patient path can be incredibly different than how it is if you don't find your triggers. So he actually pulled me aside knowing that I'm sort of an app builder and was like, how do we solve this problem? And he was like, I don't have time to solve it, but he was just like really frustrated, and I was like, hey, I'm frustrated with this too. As somebody who for years has tried to find triggers and wasn't able to before. So yeah, so it's kind of the beginning of how that started. I actually started from a user experience path, interviewing about 60 different people and having them track on Google spreadsheets. The early phase of this project wasn't even like, let's build a company and let's design interfaces. It was just, hey, can we do this? Can we have people track what they think their triggers might be and when their migraines happen, and come up with a new formula to figure out what the patterns are that are causing individual people's episodes to happen. The current system with neurologists is they give you a sheet of paper to collect information when you have a migraine.
Yeah.
And without getting into like enormous details of it right now, we're collecting different data. We're collecting better data. We're looking at it from like every time you have coffee, what happens after, instead of like when you have a migraine, if there's 4 different triggers, which one are you trying to find on this incredibly not reliable paper system that's the current system. So, you know. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, are you using AI for the kind of interaction of it, or how does the tracking bot work?
Yeah, so we collect all sorts of data points. So we have people enter when they have episodes, how severe the episodes were, all sorts of information on their episodes themselves. And then we have them track. There are some things they have to track manually, like drinking coffee, eating food, that sort of thing. Yeah. We've actually leaned pretty heavily, and this is from user experience feedback, on as much automatic tracking as we can, like the weather, workouts that you might be logging in a different app, all that sort of stuff gets automatically pulled into our app. And yeah, so then we have a pattern finding algorithm that then goes through and sort of highlights different things that could be causing your migraines. And so I'll give you an example of one thing that people actually, like, I was a little bit surprised, but they really love it. I was nervous that people wouldn't want us to track their location because that can be sort of a difficult thing. But the people who do want us to track their location, oftentimes our pattern finder will tell them, hey, you get more migraines after you are at a particular restaurant, right? Okay. And it's a really great way for somebody with migraines to say, oh man, I get, blue cheese dressing at the restaurant. I never have it anywhere else. And this is an insight where it's like the app isn't telling you on this particular algorithm, like this particular set of pattern finding, we're not telling you, hey, blue cheese is making you sick, but we're giving you clues that like, you never noticed before after you went to that restaurant that you always get a migraine exactly 12 hours after, it's the next day or whatever the pattern is. I think that's really exciting to be able to get to patterns like that and have people apply like a little bit of thinking themselves. We have other pattern finding that's more direct, but that's one of the ones that from a user, when I interview users, I've actually been a little bit surprised that they're so excited that they were able to get at things that they weren't even necessarily tracking.
Well, I mean, when you think about how horrible of an experience that is, any little help that you can get figuring out how to fix it would be huge.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit more about user experience as a general topic, because I know you have a great background in that. What, in your mind, what's the number one kind of rule of good UX in a project?
All right, this is going to sound simplistic, but always listen to your user and stay on track with that, right? So we talk so much in user experience about, interviews and surveys and really trying to figure out what people want. My experience in a lot of user experience efforts, and I've done it myself, is that people tend to get off track sometimes with what the users are actually telling them. So you'll set up a survey based on like, some executive at your company that really wants to get at X problem. And there's 2 things that happen. Either you give really good information on, what the users are thinking, and then, people not on the UX team, and sometimes people on the UX team will be like, they won't believe it. They'll be like, oh, okay, your research shows that. But, and almost every time if the research is showing something, it's going to end up being true, even if people sort of don't believe it. And the other things that happened is that sometimes there's things that are being revealed in your interviews if you keep your questions just a little bit vague that are not the problem you're originally trying to get at, but you should really be paying attention to. So
they kind of reveal themselves.
Yeah, it kind of reveals itself. So if you're making a really strict, let's just say you're doing a user interview, right? So you're doing a set of 8 interviews of different users. And you have a very tight script because you're trying to get at very specific things that can actually not really reveal as much as, yes, hitting those broad topics, but then leaving it a little bit more open. And then people will reveal to you, oh, and this is simplistic, but like your registration button's broken. Like that's not maybe a great example, but bringing it back to Migraine Insight for a second, just as an example. one of the things that I had a theory on when I built the original app was that people, really would open this app and track every day. And I really want to know what my triggers are. And of course they do. But it was through user interviews, surveys a little bit, but mostly user interviews that people kept saying to me like, oh man, I love this app. I just don't open it every day. I open it when I have a migraine.
Right.
And taking that feedback and being able to say like, okay, well, there's certain ways that we can mitigate for that in the app, whether it's like doing a weekly check-in that we wouldn't have designed if we hadn't been listening to that feedback.
Yeah.
Or asking them more questions when they actually come to check in, that kind of thing. So, we could kind of reroute our user key pathways based on people directly saying to us like, hey, we don't want to track every day. You set it up to track every day. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a little bit painful. And it's easy for a user experience person to say like, well, I'm just not going to listen to that. Like it's interesting feedback, but
right.
So.
Right. But if you're hearing something over and over, there's probably something to it.
Right.
What are some of the other attributes of good UX design that you have either seen or like implemented in some of your apps?
Well, one of the most obvious ones, but it's always worth repeating, is keeping things simple, right? So I feel like one of the basic things that we try to do as a user experience person is to map out all the things somebody's going to try to do at a particular time and give them clear pathways to do that, right? So it can be so easy in an interface to, again, in a corporate scenario, again, where you have the marketing department wanting half the screen to be marketing or, all this other stuff going on. Not that you can't compromise and reach business goals. You absolutely can. But whatever your main pathway is that you're trying to get person through that experience, like make that super simple and clear. And I think sometimes that gets lost. And actually using that as a backbone can help you then balance the other things that you're trying to design for.
And probably enhance them, right? Because like if the person is enjoying using the product, they're not going to mind when that marketing stuff comes in, and they might be more likely to utilize it.
Yeah, simply keep focused on your main task. And again, it seems simplistic when you say it like that, but 80-90% of the projects I've worked on, and again, I'm a little bit guilty of this myself, but I watch for it now, and I watch for it very closely. They just, you get off of that because you've got so many things that you want the user to do. And one of the techniques that I learned from a good friend of mine was that if you have like almost any project, you can make a key pathway. So this isn't your user journeys, but this is like each part of your experience, whether it's a set of screens or whatever, write down in a very simple, quick format, like here's the things that the user is trying to do at this particular moment. And it should be one or two things, and it should shine in your interface in a very simple way.
Okay. Speaking of building those frames out, what do you use for prototyping or wireframing?
Oh my gosh, I am hugely in love with Figma. This is just the last couple of years. It's a newer tool anyway. But I mean, I come from old school, like InDesign, OmniGraffle, like Sketch, Axure, all the way up to all those like really great tools. I mean, there's just been some really great evolution in user experience tools in the last 10 or 15 years. But Figma, oh my gosh, and especially as somebody right now, I'm working on a very small team. It's like me and one programmer and some little bit of user experience, user testing help. It just simplifies everything. You can componentize things. A lot of what you're building can be consumed by the programmer in a way that hasn't really been solved by other user experience tools. So part of the reason I love it is just the ease of workflow process, as much as the ease of developing and designing the interfaces themselves. So enormous Figma fan.
You can design the way you want the interface to look, but it is actually building the components that are then usable by your programmer to implement.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been done a little bit in other tools, but Figma just got it exactly right. I mean, you can click on any component, bring it back to a library if you want, break down components within components, and then also have the programmer be able to click on that and say, here's literally the CSS that was used, right? So as a designer in a tool, you're working with strokes and fills and you're doing all the normal sort of designery things. And then there's just a new view, and I can click on it myself. Like anybody can click on it, and where you can go and look at, you can just literally lift the code right out of it. Be like, okay,
Awesome.
if you were doing it in CSS, it's this. And like we're using React Native, we don't use CSS, but we use a very similar language to a style markup language that translates really well. So it makes changes easier. Obviously, like one of the things that always happens on projects is that you refine and refine. If you're doing it well, you should be refining.
You're getting that user feedback.
Yeah, getting that user feedback. User feedback is we hate that color red and we like that one. I mean, that, simplistic, but that should be in a consumable format. So if you change it in one place on your Figma, you can then relay to your programmer that you want it changed, in the app. But because the programmer can see how you kind of set things up in Figma, there's this conceptual communication that doesn't happen in some other tools where you're literally like, when I'm using this particular color red who's set up as like red 5 in my system, it's used in a certain, my expectations of where that should be used are communicated in a more effective way. And it's not just colors. It's like, how you're framing things out in your mind as a designer is incredibly clear to the developer. So
that seems like it would make things a whole lot easier for everybody. What kind of languages, if someone is interested in getting into UX design and really wanted to be a well-rounded designer, what kind of languages would you suggest that they learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that user experience is one of those things that has so many roles in it. And again, in different scenarios, smaller startup, larger corporation, you might not even need any programming languages to really shine at what you're doing. You might spend your time focusing on what are the best accessibility standards and different formats that are being delivered to the customer. But I do think that most user experience roles, like knowing some programming is just awesome. And coming as my background as a programmer myself, of course, I'm a little biased, but I would say HTML, JavaScript, CSS. Like if you can get on, one of these free courses, either Coursera or, I don't mean to necessarily plug them. There's I don't know, tens of them out there that have like a basic HTML, JavaScript, CSS course. Understanding fundamentally how those work and how they go together is only going to make you a better user experience person. So
I will shamelessly plug our Code Explorers program at Code Savvy because they can come drop in for a free afternoon and learn some of those languages too. So that's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
I know we've kind of talked around this a lot already, but just wondering if you have some specific tips for maybe conducting good user research in a project.
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. It's kind of a little bit separate. So I am a huge fan of early and often as a philosophy of how to sort of set up user research overall. So even before your project, you think that you should be doing your user research, you should be talking to your users. I mean, just like be on guard for designing, even at the basic level, a system that, is going to work really well for you. Again, I'll bring it back to the migraine things. I get migraines. I've dealt with the medical system for years and years and years. Much love to the medical system, but it would have been really easy for me to be like, oh, I'm going to get 6 months into designing before I talk to people with some formal surveys and user interviews. But I actually, started off with user interviews and making sure that people were having sort of the same problems I was encountering and that sort of thing. So start the process early and often. Do not be afraid to print out some stuff on paper and go just start shopping around. You don't have to have anything super formal, especially if you're at a smaller company, even like whatever size company. Be aware if your audience that you're asking questions to is not the audience that you're designing the software for. So that's incredibly important.
Oh, yeah.
And within that too, I'll just also, it's a little slightly off topic, but I'll give a plug for like accessibility and diversity. So as a user experience design manager, I've always been a fan of bringing my teams into the DMV in Minneapolis. It was actually in the Skyway. I worked on a team once for Target and wonderful team, just amazing group of people. And we're designing things it's hard to explain, but in a way that like, you know, wealthy white people would maybe view the world, and it matters, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like even just short trips, it's a side point, but I just think you really have to
No, it's
keep in
a
mind,
very important one.
yeah, like
Yeah.
who your audience is and who you're, so that's an important thing with user experience, I think, to just keep in mind. But I think from an overall process standpoint, just keep testing and keep pushing back, because like you are going to get people on your project not wanting to pay for user experience research and all that kind of stuff. And like get good at making it as inexpensive as possible to even get at like, you know, early problems and stuff like that. So yeah.
Awesome. Um, are there any books or podcasts or anything that you maybe get
Mm-hmm.
a lot of insight from, or that you would recommend for someone who might be pursuing a career in UX?
Right. I think if you're starting out with a career in UX, absolutely go network and meet people. Like we have the UXPA in Minneapolis, as well as many other professional organizations. So you can just Google around. Meetups might be a good place to find user experience professionals. Sometimes they're called CX professionals, slightly different thing, but you know, it's about the same realm. Graphic designers, information architects, that kind of thing. But find some professional organizations or find some meetups and just go start talking to people. People generally want to help out like people who are starting out, so they'll often have, you know, depending on what you're trying to do, they'll have more specific ideas. For books, I always love the classics. Like anything by Jacob Nielsen is a classic book, and you know that'll help you get started. Don't Make Me Think is probably the one that I've given to people the most often that I work with. It's old. I mean, I think it's like 10 or 12 years old at least, and it's all web examples, but the basic idea that what your design, people shouldn't have to like read everything on the screen and think through what they're doing in order before they click the button. Like Don't Make Me Think is one of my absolute all-time favorites. Um, what else? There's a book called Measuring the User Experience that I read actually more recently that I really liked. Um, so yeah, there's some starting points.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We'll
Mhm.
make sure we check those out and promote those. Um,
Okay.
how can people get in touch with you and or help you with the Migraine Insight work that you're doing? What
Mhm.
is it that you might need from the community?
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a good question too. So, I'm I don't check in LinkedIn every day, but getting, you know, questions over LinkedIn, I'm usually pretty responsive. Lynn at Migraine Insight is another good spot to just connect with me. I am super heads down right now on like trying to build this company and figure out funding, and you know, not figure out, I've been pitching for funding and all that kind of stuff. So as most of us are, I have a super busy schedule, but email and LinkedIn is usually a great way to sort of connect. And then what was the other part of that question? Sorry.
What can people do to help you? Like
Oh,
how can
right.
what kind of
Here I am.
support do
Like,
you need from the
yeah,
community?
yeah. From a completely tactical standpoint, I'm having a little bit of a review and ratings war right now with some of my competitors. So, completely concrete suggestion. But if you do like the app, giving it a 5-star review is like this particular point in time, actually for the next couple of years, probably even though it's, you know, is an incredibly practical way to just help me out, is to help me get
Yeah.
my ratings up. I mean, I have good ratings. Most of my ratings right now are from users who absolutely love the app. So that's always very nice.
And
And
I'm
then yeah,
assuming
I'm
that people can find the app on both platforms
yeah,
and in any app store.
right. Yeah. So
Okay.
iPhone and Android, if you search on migraine, it should come up number two.
Okay.
Number two or three, we all sort of jockey around. But and then if you have any feedback on the app, like I absolutely love interviewing people. And sometimes I love interviewing people so much I run out of people to interview. So like if you happen to be using the app and you have any feedback, like that's gold. It's gold to me to know like what is or is, more importantly, what's not working for people is really
Good.
important. And then I would also just say, like, I'm putting together like a safe agreement and some other documents to do a funding round in quarter 1 of next year. So
Awesome.
probably in about a month from now, I'm going to be hitting the road to do some hopefully closing some funding. So that's exciting. I mean, if
It is
anybody,
exciting.
see this and be interested in that.
Well, I'm very excited for you. It sounds like you are on track to have some really good growth and some exciting new opportunities coming up. So
Yeah.
I wish you all the best with that, and will help any way that I can. So
Okay.
uh,
And thank you
and
so much for
thank you
for having
for
me.
being here today and telling us more about your project. And
Mhm.
we'll link to your website and just make sure people know how to find you and get that app in their
Okay.
phones. So
Great. And I'll just say again, I really support what you're doing and thank you for doing it. So anytime reach out if I can help. And happy to be of assistance to anybody else who's, looking for some help. So thanks
perfect. Thank
again.
you so much, Lynn.
Yeah.
Code Savvy Presents is produced by Code Savvy, a 501c3 nonprofit organization committed to making computer science accessible. Visit us at www.codesavvy.org.